Hello, this is Burn This Book, a banned books book club where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book each month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This month's book is Bless Me Ultima by Rudolfo Anaya, which was published in. I don't have that handy right off the bat.
Eden.
I know.
1972.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. And it was published for adults, and it's been banned it's been challenged for 3 decades. So since the beginning of when the Library Association started tracking banned books. Joining us today with the helpful information about the year is Taylor Sorenson from Logan, Utah.
Hello.
Taylor, could you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. I currently live in Logan, but I grew up just east of Albuquerque in the east of mountains in a town called Edgewood. That distinction will become relevant here shortly as we discuss the book more. But I first read this book as a freshman in high school, and think about it from time to time. My younger brother, he also read it, so we make references to the Golden Carp on occasion, so we think about it and talk about it, and it was a good coming of age story to read, especially having grown up in the place where, nearby where the story took place. So
That's really cool. I didn't realize that you grew up where the story took place. Also, some background on Taylor. He is an attorney, and he has a family, and he has 2 children, and he is a white male. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I do identify as a white male.
Very good. Very good. We're just trying to talk about that because a lot of people are banning books to protect white children. So I think that's important to say is like, I'm white, you're white, Eden is not. And but we all have a shared love. Like, this book was really powerful for all of us, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Okay, sorry, Eden, you can get back to it.
Oh, yeah. So we'll just jump right into the summary. And each of us are going to give 30-second recap of our own summary for this book. So I think Nicolle was the most recently.
Yeah, I actually reread a lot of it this week just to freshen up on it, and I haven't really read anything in between when I read it initially a month ago versus now, so I'm pretty fresh. But my summary is a story about a young boy in New Mexico who is growing into growing into his manhood at the age of 7 or 8, and he experiences life's harshest things and has to reconcile belief in God and fate and all of those things with the help of a very magical and beautiful mentor in this old lady named Ultima. That's how I would summarize it. Okay.
I'll give I finished this a while ago, so let's give this a try. So Bless Me Ultima is about a little boy who is, it's a coming of age story about this boy who discovers a lot of contradictions in his life that he needs to try and figure out, and he's figuring it out with the help of the people around him, specifically the adults. For example, Ultima, the title character, who's a shaman, versus the Catholicism that his mother so truly believes in and wants him to be a priest, and fighting that internal battle. But also, interestingly enough, his mother is the one who vouches for Ultima the most.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun.
Okay, Taylor, what's your summary after the two of us? Well, it has to be super unique.
So my summary of this book is the story of one person who has multiple facets of his family pulling him in different directions. There's the Mares family that is Their chief cardinal virtue is freedom. And there's the Luna family, whose chief cardinal virtue is stability. And so you have the two families, and then he has these two belief systems, Christianity and pagan belief. And the point of this story is Antonio's his ability to fuse those beliefs and fuse those family virtues into a new person himself.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good summary. And I also think, to like touch on that, it's important to know also he is Mexican American. Also, he didn't learn English until he goes to school, and that's a plot point in the beginning of the book, is his learning English and knowing both Spanish and English, and the book is in Spanish and English. And so like you have all these like two worlds all the time that he's writing and dealing with, which is really interesting. But what was fascinating to me was that there was no conflict with his like being like Mexican American, which is what I would have assumed as a white person reading a book about a predominantly Mexican community in New Mexico. Was like, I would have assumed that would be most of the conflict, but it wasn't. It was all religion and then the stability versus freedom thing. Mm-hmm. Like it was much more personal and intrinsic, and wasn't. Yeah, that was fascinating.
Right, and I think there's an interesting thing to be said about New Mexico there. So having grown up there, there are, as far as I know, Caucasian Americans are not the majority in New Mexico. It is a plurality state. So there are large numbers of Native Americans, by percentage, I think only surpassed by maybe Alaska and Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. So there's a large number of Native Americans there who still live in their ancestral lands, in the Pueblos, and then there are large numbers of Hispanic Americans, many of whom, especially in the area that we're talking about in this book, have been living there since before Mexico was a country. So they receive land grants from the Spanish government that are hundreds of years old, older than the United States, and they've been living there for years and years and years. And then you have the Caucasian Americans, who are a later arrival, after the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, and mainly after World War II, when Caucasian Americans really started to move into New Mexico. So it's really a pluralist state, unlike any other that I've been in the United States, that Spanish is an official language in the state of New Mexico. English and Spanish are both co-equal official languages of the state. And by virtue of the long-standing, history of the Hispanics living in the state, I mean, it's not really the same, as Utah, which was largely unpopulated aside from Native Americans, most of whom have been moved onto small reservations, and the population of them is very small, and they were all replaced by Northern European descent people. But yeah, I mean, Santa Fe was founded before Jamestown, before Plymouth, and it's the oldest state capital in the U.S. Albuquerque was founded around about the time of it's in the 1700s. So the cities that we're dealing with here are older than anywhere else, including New England, where you're from, Eden. So, and that's missed by a lot of people, that the history here it's much older than people are used to in most of the contiguous United States.
That is a really beautiful point. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Me neither.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Do you want to get into more specifics about the plot, just so listeners, assuming we have listeners, will know what's going on? Like,
are you asking me specifically?
Should we do that?
That's a good question. Maybe we should.
Let's just do it real fast.
Okay.
So and correct me if I'm wrong. So it starts with a little boy, Antonio. He's like 7 years old. He is about to start going to school, and it's right after World War II. So soldiers are starting to return from Europe and the Pacific, and his 3 older brothers were both fighting in World War II. They have not returned home yet, and so there's a little bit of tension there. His family are devout Catholics. His mother, though, is from the farming community, and his father is like the cowboy community, so there's that freedom stability thing. And they're both kind of projecting their desires onto Antonio, and he's very young and he feels that pressure of what is he going to do? Is he going to be a priest and live in the farming community, or is he going to go be a cowboy? And so he's dealing with both of those things. And they welcome this older woman from, I was confused. Is she from his father, the cowboys community?
I think
or is she from the farming community? I think she's from the cowboy community. Right?
I don't know.
From what I understand, she's, it's kind of unclear because she travels around. She, has obviously spent time with the cowboys because they hold her in great esteem for, her healing abilities, but also the people in Puerto de la Luna, they seem to like her as well. So she, kind of like she inhabits the physical and spiritual world. She is moving between these two communities. So maybe that's a metaphor that I've missed or something. I don't know.
No, I think you're right.
And and I love I can't help but think of Avatar: The Last Airbender while talking about this book too, because you're right. Ultima is very much someone who's straddling the two worlds, and Tony kind of becomes her descendant in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she is welcomed into their home because she's getting old, and she and Tony have this very spiritual connection. He has a lot of visions, and she understands them, and she was actually there at his birth. And so, like, she sees that there's this spiritual thing inside of him and that he's very sensitive to the spiritual realm. And so she kind of like takes him under his wing. During this time, he starts going to school. His brothers come home. There's conflicts. They leave. They don't live up to his parents' expectations. There's all these things that happen in like a normal home. But also he witnesses like 3 different deaths. The death of a guy who was clearly dealing with PTSD from the war, and he shot somebody, I believe, and then he gets shot. And that's in the very beginning of the book. And then a death of the town drunk, who actually turns out to be one of the more moral characters in the book, and who's actually watching out for everybody. And then, and he like witnesses these like murders. They're not just like people just casually dying. They're definitely murdered. And it's intense. And he's just very young, trying to understand that. And he also, and one of his like good friends drowns near the end of the book. So he has like these 3 major deaths. And then he also witnesses all of these different things, all while going to catechism. So he's asking these questions about mortality, to God, and anticipating receiving all these answers once he has his first communion. He doesn't receive those answers, but he feels like he has these like spiritual awakenings when he's in nature, and when his friends introduce him to like other different gods that are not the Christian God, and when he's around Ultima. And Ultima, it's never answered if she's a witch or not, and I don't think Tony ever knows, but some people call her a witch, other people just call her a healer. And so there's like, she's a confusing little character in all of this too. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good enough kind of understanding of the book, so people kind of can see it's compared to Huckleberry Finn in that this young boy is going on like this pretty intense adult journey and asking all these really big questions about mortality and ethics and morality, all within like a span of like 2 years of his life. And then he's a man, even though he's still like 8 or 9 years old by the end of it. And that's very much like Huckleberry Finn, where Huckleberry is like, has made decisions about slavery and ethics and morality by the time it's over, after his big like journey with Jim. So that's why they're compared to each other a lot, which is interesting to me. And they're both banned a lot too, which is kind of fun. Okay. Did I miss anything out crucial that you would like to include, Taylor?
I don't think so. I think that, well, I don't know. I just think that you got the major plot points right. And one of the reasons why I like this book is the more you think about it, the more you find, and the more connections that you can make. And I mean, even, you can make connections to literature. So this book reminds me a lot of Cien Años de Soledad, or 100 Years of Solitude, which is written in Colombia by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And we recently saw an iteration of that in the movie Encanto, for those people who have seen that movie recently, about, magic and in this sort of Latin environment. It reminds me of pop culture like Star Wars, where, half of Tony's family is his Uncle Ben and Aunt Beru living on Tatooine and just want to be farmers. And then he has, the other half that's like the Skywalker half, the one that wants to be free and go be a Jedi and go be, a cowboy. And he has the spiritual guide show up, an old person who knew his family back in the day. She happens to be a woman. So this, it calls back Star Wars. It calls back, Harry Potter. So because all these stories, the hero's journey, they're all the same. They all have the same archetypes. And so, in this case, that archetype is filled by Ultima, and he has to navigate, that call to adventure, the call to, be freed on the plains and move to California like his dad wants, or no, stay and grow, beans and chilies at home. So, and both have their virtues and both have their place. But the more you think about this book, the more you see it relate to other pieces of pop culture as well.
Yeah, that's crazy. I never thought about all of those things.
Yeah. And me just bringing up Avatar: The Last Airbender, you bringing up Huckleberry Finn, just like, is this the hub book that like everything is surrounding?
Seriously, I loved what you said about dang it, I lost it. So it'll come back when it is important, because you
must not have been that good. But
it was really good, Taylor. Everything you said is like, oh, Taylor, do you just want to be a part of this podcast all the time? But you said something about, I don't know. But a point that has come is like also the fact that this book is very timeless. It didn't matter that it was set right after World War II. It could have been set 2 years ago. It could have been set 500 years ago, and the story wouldn't have had to change. Mm-hmm. I think it also helps that Catholicism is so old, because it really goes into that. But like, it's a very timeless story. It doesn't need to be about, post-war. That's what's crazy, is like all the things that I thought it would be about, when I realized it was about after World War II, I was like, none of those things were brought in, and it wasn't about like stereotypical American issues. It was much deeper and much like, yeah. So yeah, the hero's journey.
Another thing that I like about this is that, and you can tell that Rudolfo Anaya is, really trying to tap into his heritage of being a mestizo, being a mix, and, a huge part of Mexican heritage and Mexican American heritage is being a mestizo. And if you don't know what a mestizo is, it's a person who is a European and an Indian mixed. So Mexico kind of built their whole national identity on being the mix of Spaniards and Native Americans. And so the national identity of Mexico is built up in fusing the two cultures of Native America and Europe, but also extends to Catholicism and pagan religions. So there's a term called syncretism, and syncretism is when two religions borrow off of each other and kind of form a new religion. And in many cases, people think that kind of happened in Mexico. So the conquistadors arrived, and, the natives all had their different gods, and, Catholicism really was kind of a great fit for that, in that, there's already a system of saints who have their own different little domains, but there's one main god that you worship, and then there's, this mother goddess type situation with the Virgin, and that she intercedes for you. That same sort of structure already existed in Native America, and so it was kind of an easy thing to say to, Indians who are just living their lives, to just say, look, yeah, we get that you believe in Tonantzin, who's this mother goddess, just, from now on, just call her the Virgin, and guess what? Some guy just had the Virgin appear to him in Guadalupe. So just the Virgin of Guadalupe, she cares about you. And so, syncretism is a huge part of Mexican culture. And when people from Mexico came to New Mexico, they brought that with them. And so this situation that Antonio is in, where he, sees Catholicism as, it's the center of his town. His parents want him to be a priest, and he has this huge pull towards, the European part of his identity. And then his friends start, letting him know about the golden carp, who they believe will drown the world and has supernatural powers and predates, European arrival and so forth. So, that little struggle in Antonio's mind mirrors the same struggle that has gone on writ large over the history of Mexico and the history of a European expansion into the New World. So that's a cool side note that's not super relevant, but it does, pull into, Antonio's struggle, and it's a microcosm. His struggle is a microcosm of the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think
relevant.
Yeah, super relevant.
Yeah.
Because one of my takeaways that I had from this was being like an Asian American, being a daughter of immigrants who moved here, and very much having Hong Kong encapsulated into my parents, and having that be my backdrop for growing up in a very white town in Connecticut. And so, like, also like Tony, wanting to appeal to the whiter population there, while also staying true to my Chinese-ness, which I feel like I'm only getting a hang of now at 29 years old. Like, just back in November, I decided that I'm going to pick up because technically English is my third language, but it's my most fluent language. But back in November, I was like, I'm going to pick up Cantonese again because I want my daughter to know Cantonese and, like, be in tune with her heritage as well. And it makes me think a lot about biracialness. And, like, there are things about, I know most parents, there are a lot of things about their children that they're never going to understand, but I think biracialness brings another level to that too. And I just hope my experience being an immigrant in the a child of immigrant in the United States could help me be an Ultima for my daughter in trying to figure out the duality of the world of like, oh, my dad's white, my mom's Chinese. What does that make me? And no one knows what I look like. Like, and she'll probably get questions like, "What are you?" So that was an interesting personal application of this book that goes, right in line with what you're talking about, Taylor.
That's really beautiful. I also think, like, the points you made, I think they're super relevant. Also, you're so good at talking, Taylor. That was really lovely to listen to. I'd like to listen.
Probably why he's an attorney.
Yeah, probably why you're an attorney. You're probably really good at your job, Taylor. Yeah, I'd love to just have you, like, lecture, and I just want to sit there and listen because that was so interesting. And even though that is a unique experience to Mexico and to New Mexico, like, just as a person living here in this country, like, I've been struggling over the last 2 years. I think the pandemic really brought on a lot of, like, religious questions for me, and I'm a deeply religious person. I think I'm more like Antonio's mom than anyone else in the book, in that I'm like, yeah, well, there's answers, and you just do it, and it's so good, and like, I really hold on to my faith really intensely, but there have been so many things that, like, have just been irreconcilable for me. And so reading this book, I was like, oh, I have a friend who understands this. Like, Antonio still desperately wants to find those answers within Catholicism, and it's not, but he also acknowledges that, like, a lot of his answers are like found through the golden carp and found through the mysteries of Ultima, and, like, her healings were things that the priest could not do. And I just, like, it was so nice to read that and to realize, like, it's totally okay to have those feelings and to be in between those spaces. And what was the term you used, Taylor? That, like, the dual, this I'm not going to say it because I don't think I know it.
The merging of the
Yeah,
religions?
the merging of the
It's called syncretism.
syncretism. Yeah, I think that I think my therapist is actually trying to help me work on that sort of idea on a personal level of just how to have these two things be true. Like what's the other way of saying it? Or maybe this is not even the same idea. But just having like two truths be true even if they counter one another. And I think this book was just like really therapeutic for me. I loved it because I really am going through that right now, and I'm trying to figure out how I can still honor my deeply important religious beliefs while also anticipating and expecting more, and also embracing truth and other things that I'm getting from the outside and honoring the other spiritual experiences I'm having. And I think just as human beings in this global world, not to undermine your experience, Eden, at all as a daughter of immigrants. Well, I also would say you immigrated here as a young child too, though.
That's a good point.
So you've got a double thing there going on too. So I don't know. I don't want to step on your narrative, but you should give yourself a little more credit for all the journeys you've gone through. But I'm always trying to figure out also my history, because my family's Catholic, my extended family's Catholic, and I'm always trying to balance that. And also with what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, my family's Eastern European and is definitely being affected right now, and I have family that still live in Eastern Europe, and just trying to understand what I'm accountable for and what I'm holding on to with me being an American, but also I have these roots in this culture and these traditions that do matter to me. And I don't know, it's just it feels very frustrating and confusing, but this book was really, it just was so beautiful because it handled all of those things so well. And his issues with death were so good. Ugh. Because I feel like everyone's dying around me all the time, and this book was really relatable for me, where I was yeah, how do I reconcile that? And that was it was just a beautiful, I think it's just, I wish every young child would read that. I wish every teenager could read this, because I think it would be very helpful to create a healthy narrative about religion and about social and cultural expectations.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why this book is good also is that, it shows that, so I mean, Antonio, he's from a very small insular community, when compared to the world we live in now. So Puerto de la Luna is kind of like a stand-in for Santa Rosa, which at the time had at most a couple thousand people living there. And, New Mexico's still not a huge place. There's not very many people that live there. It's like the fifth largest state by area, but it's got to be in the the high 40s as far as number of people that live there. So it's very sparsely populated. The town he lives in is very small, very insular. Most everyone there, except for Florence and Red, are Catholic. There's a couple Protestants. So most everyone there kind of has a shared history. But even then, Antonio still has these issues of coming to grips with his belief system. He still has issues coming to grips with his family, even though, from our perspective, you're oh, well, they're all Hispanic Americans. How hard could it be? But he still is coming to grips with these different sides of his family, even though they may be ethnically the same. They're not, their value system is different. And so, even in this small insular community, even if you live in Provo, Utah, or you live in Puerto de la Luna, you still have to come to grips with your belief system, and you still have to understand that there are parallel truths. There are multiple places that you can gain spiritual understanding and growth, and there are multiple places that you can understand in a deeper sense what's going on in the world. And so I think that it remains applicable today for that reason, because as the world grows, that only becomes even more applicable, of trying to navigate the shoals of competing ideologies. And there's evil people in the world, like Tenorian, or whatever his name is, this bar owner. There's evil people in the world that you have to navigate, and there's very good people in the world, and there's morally gray people, and most of the people in the world are morally gray. And so navigating these relationships even if it is in a small community or in a large community like we live in now, it's relevant, and it's something that people need to struggle with their entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite scene out of the whole book was when the kids are playing confession, and they're making Tony be the priest, and they're all confessing their sins to him, and like piling all their clothes on him, and like all the clothes I think you can read into as like symbolism for sin and him feeling burdened by it, but like everyone forcing Florence to confess to Tony, and Florence just straight up saying, "I have nothing to confess." Even though like from the outside it seems like he's very sinful because he doesn't believe in God because God took away his parents. But like Tony in that moment, he like looked at Florence and he says he has nothing to confess, and like he truly believes that, and I truly see that. And he doesn't need to confess anything, and like the kids all kind of gang up on Tony after that.
They beat him up.
Like, yeah, I was
it
trying
just
to
keeps going and going, and I was like, oh my
gosh,
his chest.
And like we talked about how there wasn't really an answer at the end, but there is like a slight answer at the end, and it's sympathy and empathy for each other. And I thought that was an interesting conversation that Tony had with his dad. And how his dad talks about how the magic in the world comes from sympathy and understanding each other. And like I think that confession scene was the part where it clicked for me, where it's like, oh, Tony understands. Tony has sympathy for Florence, and like sees where he's coming from, and that's why he's able to, like, even with a black and white Catholicism background, he's able to what's that word?
The word that Taylor taught us?
No.
Oh. Because I don't know why I'm so nervous to say it. I feel like I'm going to make a fool of myself. Which word are you looking for?
Not a compromise.
Reconcile?
Reconcile. Thank you. He's able to reconcile those two seemingly contradictory things.
Can I share the quote that you were talking about from the dad? He's talking to Tony. It's near the end of the book, and he says, "Understanding comes with life. As a man grows, he sees life and death. He is happy and sad. He works, plays, meets people. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to acquire understanding, because in the end, understanding simply means having a sympathy for people. Ultima has empathy for people, and it is so complete that with it she can touch their souls and cure them." And Tony says, "That is her magic." And then the father says, "I and no greater magic can exist." And like it's just like it's so good because it's such a simple solution, and with the context that Taylor provided, it like really adds a lot of beauty to this. Of like, this is also like a culture who, like, there's a lot of different communities that are working through with that, like these parallel things, these complicated feelings, and like the whole mysticism aspect is also fascinating in Latin American culture that I didn't understand at all about. I feel like I'm now just like learning that it's a thing. And so like this was a really cool, it was just, I really loved it. 10 out of 10. Taylor, do you have any thoughts? I know that was all over the place.
Would recommend. I agree with you. I think that it's a great story of, that anybody, including someone from some random town in eastern New Mexico on the plains, can grow to understand people who are not like them, and understanding people and understanding where they're coming from helps you love them. And if you love them, then you are able to treat them how, most belief systems believe that you should treat other people kindly and with kindness and generosity. And, as, Antonio gets to know Narciso, the town drunk, he figures out that he's actually not the town drunk, but he's actually just a really good guy. And then even the person who, you know, who's shot at the very beginning, he understands more about, you know, the fact that he was changed by the war, and his dad, who he is kind of standoffish with at the start, who is always angry that he doesn't get to go to California. He grows to understand that his father misses his freedom, and you know, he has interaction after interaction with people who he gets to know, and he comes to understand what they're going through, and then he comes to love them. And because he comes to love them, then he understands and treats them with kindness and with dignity. And so I think that's a lesson that we can all take away from this book, is that the more you understand someone, then the more you love them, and the more you are able to reach out that hand of friendship. And yeah, I mean, not everybody's going to have their friends pile all their proverbial sins on them and tell them, you know, to forgive or not forgive, you know, somebody. Most people aren't going to go through that experience, but we can all have those personal moments where you come into contact with someone you don't like, or it comes from a different belief system, or is a different race than you, or is of a different, you know, religion or political persuasion or whatever. And as you come to understand them, you will come to love them, and then you'll treat them differently.
I love that. Yeah. Could I add in one more point that I want to touch on real quick before, because we're also over time. Yep. So let us know when you want us to stop, Taylor. But one more point is just that, like, there's the resilience factor in this book was, like, unbelievable. The way Ultima explained to Tony about all these deaths and, like, how to handle all these hard things, that if they build into your strength, she said something about, like, building into your strength, or, like, something like that. And that was so amazing. And, like, that changed how I look at hardship, is that it's about, I want to find the quote. I can't find it. I'm looking for it. But that's another piece to this that I think is really well worth thinking about and talking about, especially if this is a classroom in a school, is, like, how does Tony cope with these hard things? And is that a good coping mechanism? Because, like, gosh, I think he's coping so well. He's leaning on other people, and then he's also being taught that these things can help make him stronger. And, like, I would love to have that taught in a school setting. And because when I taught high school for 1 year, a lot of my kids were dealing with massive amounts of death. I mean, it was during the pandemic, and one of my students lost both of their parents. And so, like, yeah, so they were dealing with real things. And to be able to, like, to take them to a book where someone else was also dealing with that kind of, like, questioning of mortality at all times, and learning how to cope. And there's just, like, such good, clear examples that Ultima gives him of, like, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to handle this? And her comforting and her sympathy and her allowing him time to mourn, and then also time to, like, get in touch with the land and, like, develop other skill sets after he saw his friend die. Like, there's just so many amazing little tools that I've never read in such a really well, like, it just was well done. It was very well done.
And my book had, like, a little introduction of Rudolfo, and he said he has, like, no experience in writing at all.
Yeah, this was his first book.
This was his first book ever, and he just, like, edited it with his wife.
Yeah.
It was like, what?
It took him, like, 5 years or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good, both of your comments is a good segue into, it's so unfortunate because this book teaches so many great things about understanding and love and learning how to navigate different worldviews than your own. And yet it is frequently challenged.
Why do you think it's challenged?
Why do you think, why do you guys think that?
Well, you know, first off, like, having lived through Harry Potter being released in the United States and everything, and, like, people freaking out about witchcraft, and this happened in the 2000s, let alone 1970s. So number one thing that I'm sure it's been challenged on is, you know, allusions to the curandera, the supernatural, the you know, using means aside from Western medicine to help people cope with problems.
That's a good guess.
That's a good guess.
My guess is like, because I didn't even think about that, but you're probably right. And I think I'm just underestimating how afraid people are of like stories about that kind of stuff. But my other guess was like, there was a part in it that I was like, I couldn't tell if it was during the prayer thing. And I think it's because I was looking for stuff to be like, why would I ban this book? And if I wasn't looking at it, I wouldn't have interpreted things like that. And I even had like my boyfriend read a section to be like, is this what happened? I couldn't tell if there was a part where like horse was masturbating when he was talking about his sins. Like I got confused, but I also think I was looking at it from the framework of like, I am trying to find out why this book is evil.
Yeah. I don't know if I.
But it was unclear. Yeah. So I feel like I was just like,
right. There is that section when they talk about their sins that they all, multiple people say, "Oh, I saw somebody down by the river with their girlfriend or whatever," and
And they do use the F word in that part. So maybe that's why it could be banned. I don't know. That feels like a massive stretch to me.
Yeah. I wrote 3 things: witches, prostitution, and swearing in Spanish.
Okay, well, why was it banned?
So let's look this up right now.
Yeah.
Real time.
Taylor, legitimately, the reason why we want this to be a surprise is because it's always shocking. Like, we found out why the Bible has been banned, and that blew our minds. Because it was not why we would have thought it would be banned.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty fun.
Okay, so here we go.
Mm-hmm.
This has a timeline.
Oh, love it. Okay, go on.
So the library started tracking in the 90s. So in 1992, California challenged it for many profane and obscene references, vulgar Spanish words, and glorifies witchcraft and death.
Whoa! You
nailed it.
Yeah, you both nailed it. I was way off. Okay, so that was in 1992 in California.
1996 in Texas. The book was too violent. 1999 in California, it was removed from a school for violence and profanity that might harm students after being chosen. After the book was chosen because the student population is 80% Hispanic. So they're trying to protect the Hispanic students.
Strange. Okay.
Yeah. 2005 in Colorado.
Ooh, represent. That's where I'm from.
Yeah. Let's see. The book was removed from reading lists, and parents asked to burn it.
Oh my gosh.
The book was removed after 2 parents complained about profanity. He gave all copies of the books to the parents, who tossed them in the trash. The superintendent later apologized after students organized an all-day sit-in at the school gym.
See, that's what Colorado always delivers. Every time there's a book banning, the students have a sit-in. It's just the way it is.
Well, and it seems like it's always like 3 parents, 2 parents, 1 parent. It always seems to be this really, the vocal minority who says that these books should not be read.
And what we've learned is usually they haven't read it. Like, they've read, like, excerpts or they've heard things about a book. But they usually have not actually read it. That's usually the people who are banning stuff.
They haven't read it with full understanding or sympathy.
There you go.
Yeah.
Without the magic.
Without the magic. But that's the reason why they were banning it in the first place.
Yeah, because they didn't want the magic.
2000, it was banned or challenged in New York because the book is full of sex and cursing.
Full of sex?
I wouldn't say it was.
I wouldn't say that either.
2008 in California, removed by the superintendent for being profane and anti-Catholic.
Whoa. Where was this banned?
California.
That was also in California?
Yeah.
Was that in like a... Okay. Interesting. That was a public school?
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating.
And then 2013 in Idaho, the superintendent banned it for profanity and alleged inappropriateness. I love the alleged. Yeah.
We're not sure.
We're not sure. Apparently this book is inappropriate, so I'm going to ban it.
That's really interesting. I feel like as a teenager, the content that I was digesting outside of school, like Gossip Girl and garbage like that, was like way more damaging to my psyche and morality than
way more full of sex.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
And it didn't even come with the Catholic guilt, so it's...
I know. And the thing about this book, too, is that I genuinely feel like anyone who ascribes to any religion could identify with the questions that Antonio is asking. Yeah. Like, yes, it was very specific to Catholicism, but, like, even me as an LDS person, like, I genuinely identified with a lot of those questions where I was like, I don't feel, and it was, like, such a healthy investigation for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know, I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like if you're reading it in good faith, it could be a very powerful friend for you.
Definitely.
And if you're reading it in bad faith, of course it's going to be stressful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Taylor. Any last thoughts before we close out and introduce our next book?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I just
think
that...
any other thoughts, Taylor?
Yeah, I just think that, for this book is for anyone who has more than one facet to their family or has more than one facet to their religious experience, and anybody who, comes into contact with opposing views. So in short, it's for everyone. I think that anybody could read this and pull something useful out of it to apply to themselves.
Absolutely. Oh, I have actually one more question for you, Taylor. When you were reading it in high school, how did you digest it? Like, what was your experience? Do you remember your initial reaction in reading it in high school?
Yeah, my initial reaction is, different than after having a college education. So, reading it when I was in high school, I focused a lot more on the surface of the actual narrative. So, the fact that there's a big giant golden fish was really strange, and the fact that, there's people getting shot left and right, and then the big ball of hair, the images on the surface of the narrative really stuck in my brain and were funny at the time often, and I didn't really take a lot of time to pull it into my daily life. But I do quote to my younger brother all the time, like, like, this is what the golden carp wants, or like, oh, I can't do this, I'm meant to be a priest. We joke about this book because we've both read it, and we both read it in high school. But as far as like applying it as in this more deep way, I didn't get that until I was older and read it just recently. So,
but you weren't like offended by it in high school. You weren't like, ugh, this is questioning my Christian faith.
No, I wasn't offended by it. I didn't see it as anti-religion. Because at the end he doesn't disparage his Catholic faith, and he doesn't disparage the golden carp. He just says at the end, he's like, oh well, maybe I need to form a new religion, and his new religion is just pulling into his religious experience all these different beliefs that he has. So I didn't see it as allegedly disparaging Catholicism, but I'm not Catholic, so I can't speak to that.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well, sweet. Thank you again, Taylor, for your time and your insight.
Seriously, you're such a treasure of a person. Honestly, Taylor, like, I was so happy that you responded to Eden on our Instagram story, and like, all my memories of you are just as such a lovely, easy to be with person, and I am just really jazzed that we've crossed paths again.
Yeah,
you're very kind. Thank you.
Well, it's true though. You are one of those. And I just remember you being from New Mexico and me just being obsessed with that. So thank you.
New Mexico is a cool place. It's definitely underrated, I would say. So there's a lot of cool things, and there's a lot of cool history there that kind of goes unnoticed because it's in the middle of nowhere and overshadowed by Texas and California and so forth. So there's a lot going on there, and I would encourage anyone who has the chance to visit. And so I'll plug for my home state.
I love that. I hope you end up moving back there someday. Maybe, I don't know, if you want to. I'm not going to pressure you and your wife and your kids to do that. But
we were going to do our girls trip there last year.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's like my favorite place because I'm an old man who has arthritis.
Or a young boy in Newsies.
Yeah, I'm a young newspaper boy who's
Yeah.
trying to unionize. And no one's listening. Talk about a movie that radicalized our generation towards like pro-unions. Disney did not know that. They should have been banning that if they wanted us to be a capitalist.
And the fact that that same guy went on to play Batman, radical change.
There's so many things. That should be in your podcast, is the journey of Jack Kelly to Bruce Wayne. Where we like walk through each of his movies.
And the interim stop as Teddy from Little Women.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. No one ever brings that up, but that is one of his best roles. Oh, so good. He was so charming in that.
I still have to see that one.
You've never seen that, Little Woman?
Seen that one.
Oh,
I'm an
it's
immigrant.
And you're from, I can't believe that you're from Connecticut and you have not seen that version.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's Winona
Speaking
Ryder.
speaking of Connecticut and Orchard House,
Yeah.
that's like, oh, it's in Massachusetts. Okay.
But still,
My Connecticut wife is correcting me that Orchard House is in Massachusetts.
But it's still in New England though. So Eden has no excuse, and
I have no excuse.
it's also Winona Ryder, Sarah Sarandon. Is that her name?
Susan
Sarandon. Ooh. Kristen Dunst is in it. Claire Danes is in it. I feel like there's other really famous people that we're not noting, but
What's the name of Joe? She's Winona Ryder. She's
Winona
Stranger Things.
forever, and also Gabriel Byrne. He is amazing. I can't think of anything else he's in, but he's in that movie. It's just like, it's the perfect Little Woman. The new Little Woman did not hold a candle. Sorry.
Well, for starters, the new Little Women had no American women.
Yeah, and they had the guy playing from Better Call Saul playing
She's
the dad,
Canadian.
so he seemed out of place.
Yeah. That's actually true. Also, it was very confusing. The only way I knew what timeline we were in was by Amy's bangs. Other than that, it was like so massively confusing. I was like, what is going on? We're going in the future and the past. It was just like too...
Although I will say, the new Little Women, the German professor guy, way more appealing, makes way more sense that she would be into him than the old one. The old one, he's like wicked old.
He was, but also the older I'm getting, the more I'm like, I get it. But as a kid, I did not get it. But the older I am, I'm like, interesting. He's got that gray hair. He's kind of got something like stable about him. He plays the violin. He's got lots of books.
Yeah.
He just is like
But you're
kind
saying
of...
that as like a almost 30-year-old woman, and not
That's
as a
true. And also,
18-year-old.
I have to give them credit. Maybe in the 1800s, they aged really fast. Like, he could have been 21 in that movie. You know? It's like the...
Maybe he had typhoid as a boy, and it just
Maybe. Well, it's like the Golden Girls thing. They were like in their 50s, and they look like they're in their 80s.
I had no idea.
Yeah, they were like in their 50s. Like, their characters were in their 50s, and the actors were also like very young.
Wow.
But modern 50-year-old women are like the Sex and the City cast.
Yeah.
I've been seeing that meme. That's why I bring it up. So it's just, we're aging differently, okay? So your 30 is really a 20. So you're very young, Taylor, and I will be as well. I will be.
Yeah, it's like Parks and Rec, where he's saying, scientists believe the first man to live to 150 has already been born, and I believe I am that man. So
That's actually so good. Oh my gosh! On that note, I think we'll close out.
Yeah, we'll close out. And our next book will be Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume.
Yeah.
Which has been challenged for 2 decades. Over 2 decades.
So we're excited to dig into Judy Blume because I didn't know any of her books were ever challenged.
Oh, she's like one of the her
really?
and Toni Morrison.
I do not know much about Judy Blume. That's for another talk, another time. If you want to join us for that, Taylor, you are welcome. If your wife wants to join us for that, she is welcome. If your kids want to read it, they are welcome.
I would say it's probably too old for his kids. Not just
we don't know
reading
their
level,
kids though, but we don't know them. They might be like Very much ready for that conversation. Okay, I'm gonna end this recording. Thank you so much, and I will. Yep.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicolle Corin and Eden Wen.
Music written by me, Nicolle Corin, and produced and performed by my dad, Frank.